semester.
Right. Well, you do. Okay, well, let's get into it. You speak a lot in the first session about immigration and its effect on the artistic legacy. Why is this so important?
Well, let me ask you your own background in terms of immigration. What generation American? And when I'm asking you, Paul, I'm asking everybody,
Right.
and the kids too. Look, I mean, some people know this immediately, but some people, some families, this is not a big issue. How many generations have you been in America, Paul?
Well, I can't tell you the generations, but I can tell you it was colonial. It was
Ah,
British and Welsh, and then we have some Pennsylvania Dutch in there, and of course on my wife's side is probably newer. There are Irish immigrants on her side.
aha. So they would have possibly come in this period that our first session material
Right.
delves into. Well, I've got sort of the same thing. My father, they're from the hollows and the coal mines of West Virginia. That's where his family had come from, which means maybe not colonial, but certainly 18th century, probably. But then my mother was first generation, so that makes me second generation. So most everybody who is in our circle of scholars or their friends, if you ask anybody, there are people who just got here a month ago. That's how new America's continuously created by an influx. And obviously, when we did our first semester, you remember we had that map up all the time. I actually don't have that map on there. I'm going to see if I actually have my. Yeah, we're looking. Check right there. But you remember the map we started almost all the classes with, and talked about who got here first, the French, the English. I don't need to go to it now, but the French, the English, the Dutch, the Spanish, yeah. Oh, good. We do have our level. No. But we're not now. That was the way we looked at our 17th century, our 18th century culture. But now it's really much more of an issue of the East Coast and areas like Galveston and even the West Coast are being just inundated with mass immigration, and people coming from completely different reasons than they did in the 17th and 18th century. So I used the example in our first class session of the parents of George Gershwin. Yeah. Don't do it now. His parents, he would have been a first-generation American, or he would have, I forget which of the siblings came over when they were little and which ones were born here, etc. But we're going to get so much of our talent through immigration. We're going to get our composers, our singers, our dancers, our conductors. It's just that they're all going to be on those boats coming over, and they're going to hit the shores with a great European training, often a lot of persecution in the past that has driven them on what I like to call the Via Dolorosa, the sad road that led them out of their villages, like my grandmother's family, with a satchel of whatever they could carry to the docks, to the ships in Hamburg or whatever, to Ellis Island. That's not a happy journey for most people, even if it's full of promise. And they're going to hit the ground, and they're going to try to figure out how to use their talent to survive.
So we had this, as you were talking about the map, and you showed us areas which were largely, Dutch or even Hispanic, and just all of these, colored areas of the map, so to speak, or shaded in areas. Is it that now some of that is going back over to Europe? Is that what we're talking about here? It was like Europe and was coming to America, but now that the art is becoming a little more American or has its own flavor, and now it's going over to Europe and they're seeing something new. Is that what we're talking about?
Well, that's part of what's so interesting about the last part of the 19th century, and I hope that's in this class session and in the assignment something that our people enjoyed sort of turning their attention to. We get, that big divider was at 1876, Philadelphia's centennial exhibit, like a World's Fair, because that's a big factor in our first session, the World's Fairs that were, or they were called exhibitions. And that 1876 is when we grew up. Not only was it magnificent, not quite the Chicago World's Fair of 1893 yet, which was really on this first-class scale anywhere in the world. But it was still big enough, and enough people came, and we had enough development, enough technology, all kinds of new technology. I mean, we're looking at things like, you know, the development of already of things like the safety elevator and all kinds of industrial and farm equipment, and you know, we're into the age of technology. But anyway, enough people came to that 1876 and saw America as a grown-up country. And that really is a watershed in our cultural history. So pretty soon there's going to be, I mean, they're already a little curious about our painters and our writers, especially. They like our writers. They like that Edgar Allan Poe, you know, Washington Irving. And in the late 19th century, they're going to love the poets. They're going to want to read about Longfellow. They're going to want to read about the different just the different literature that's coming out of New England, which, you know, they're going to just not be able to ignore the quality of American arts, not in the volumes that we've absorbed it from them, but certainly more and more buzz about what we here in America are doing.
Well, so many people went over to Europe to study art, but we started to develop art institutions here. And what's the significance about the way our American art institutions were founded?
Well, you know, and here's again a project, an oral project from Professor Carol, but we never get tired of telling people about wonderful things we can all do, all of us do, to learn. But here's what I challenge everybody to do. Look around your own neighborhood. Now, if you live in St. Louis or if you live in Chicago, or, you know, you've got a lot to look at. But what if you live in a smaller town and you have some kind of arts institution? My guess is if it goes back far enough, I mean, if it were just founded 20 years ago, it's probably a different story. But if it were founded in the late 19th century or early 20th, you probably are going to find out that at the root of that was one of two types of models. Could be three types for sure, could be 10 types, but the two most prominent, you either have a highly talented European somebody, conductor, violinist, painter, educator, someone who says, I'm going to make this happen here. Or you have someone like in our model in the first unit, Henry Higginson, who was a businessman, but he wanted an orchestra in Boston so they could play the great classics. And he funded that. He got the money for that. He made that happen over years and lived to see it completely established. And he did it from a businessman's point of view. So I want to challenge everybody. And you know, Paul, you haven't been in your community. You've moved recently, right? So you can challenge your kids. Let's figure out, how did these things get started? Who was at the root? And why did they go to the extraordinary effort to put together a museum, an orchestra, a dance institute, an art institute of some sort? Why? And who did it? And from what region, and bringing what tradition with them?
Well, we've kind of lost the World Fair type thing, haven't we? With Facebook, with technology, talking about technology, what have we lost, and what have we gained with that happening?
Well, again, a great way to find out about this, if our students are lucky enough to have a grandparent or a great-grandparent or an older neighbor, someone in the church that you can talk to, someone in your synagogue somewhere who went to a World's Fair, even, you know, I mean, that it have to be not one of the 19th century ones, right? But the excitement of a World's Fair, I can remember the one in New York when I was a little, I mean, I was tiny, but I sort of, at least I think I remember people, you hear, you know, you have pictures, whatever. The excitement of my mother, she wasn't going to be able to go, but the fact that it was happening in New York where she was from, there was, excitement would build the way it does. We get this a little bit with the Olympics now. But we can sit back and watch every bit of that from our easy chair, right? Eating Snickers bars with our feet up. Right. Imagine if for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years people talked about it. They read about it in the newspapers and heard about it in letters from relatives who lived in that area. And they made plans and they bought train tickets. And it was the chance to travel a far distance usually to see the most cutting-edge technology, culture, and not only just from America, but from all over the world, and to taste Indonesian food, and to hear Panamanian music, and to see the newest, you know, wringer washer that had been developed, or to, you know, hear and see for yourself Mr. Edison's or some of the other inventors like Tesla's or whatever you got to see. the cylinder technology for the gramophone, and that would be the place you would see it. Can you imagine what that would have felt like?
It was like a showcase for the technology, but also of the exotic, right?
Yes, and what does that word exotic mean? What is exotic? It means X out from where we are. You know, if you're from Florida, snow is exotic, and if you're from Milwaukee, those palm trees are exotic. Exotic is what we don't have and what we idealize and yearn for because it fulfills some kind of idealistic sense of what we don't have. So we're curious about it, and we construct in our minds what it is, and then we want to go see it and see if the real thing is even better than we thought. So the exotic was virtually the world, and who got to go see that? Not many people. But the World's Fair brought tens of thousands of people in one spot, and they could wander around like the people are doing in Olympic Village. You know, don't you, I'd love to go to the Olympics, but I think wandering around the Olympic Village with all of the things they have going on there for the visitors and the athletes, wouldn't that be almost as interesting as being in some of the sport itself?
I'm sure it'd be an event of a lifetime. I know my family went to a World Fair right before I was born, sometime, and I heard about it my whole life. When we went to the World Fair, it just, and of course, I'm not bitter or anything like that. That I missed this. No. But
where did they go? Do you remember where it was? Was it in? Was it
I'd have to hear the years, where they were and when they were, but I want to say
you weren't there yet. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I really encourage our students, especially the young ones, but our adult students, that are part of our adventure together. If you go back and or see if it's in some letters, or ask someone who's in their, that person will be 80s or 90s. If you're fortunate enough, someone in their early hundreds, what did that mean? It's I would prefer to Google some of this. I have to admit, I like that we can see it all now. But as you say, you heard about it your whole childhood, and you knew you missed something.
Right. Can I recommend a movie?
Please, you're Mr. Movie. We love that about you.
Meet Me in St. Louis.
Yes.
Okay, I mean that's the backdrop of the whole movie, and obviously it's a very musical movie, and they do a job of building that that excitement that the World's Fair is coming to St. Louis.
Now that was the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, and the musical, of course, is talking about the family and the little love story that develops in the great music. But we will be looking at that one because after the Chicago World's Fair, that's the one. And actually, let's talk about that's one that we know more about because of that marvelous musical, that marvelous movie, Dear Judy Garland, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
But let's talk about the Chicago's World's Fair, because that whole thing was an announcement that after the complete devastation of Chicago in 1871, in October 8 through 10, when that city just burned. After that great fire that's, one of again, a watershed in American culture, that city had to be rebuilt, and with the newest ideas in safety and construction, and that gave rise to that amazing effort. And then that Chicago World's Fair in 1893, just a little over 20 years later, is a testament to that city becoming the city of Chicago we know today. Again, when you just drive through Chicago, you may not think about how that disaster gave rise to some of the most important cultural aspects of Chicago today, and celebrated in that World's Fair.
Wow, that's great. Well, so what did, if I can skip a little bit, but
please,
what did Europeans think of this, and what did they think of? What did they start thinking of American art?
Well,
there's some wonderful
things in the lesson, and again in the pre-recorded part that our students can watch, at any point. All of our partakers of our work together. I show a wonderful caricature. I talk a lot about caricatures, especially Thomas Nast, who did in Harper's, and who did not only very endearing things such as the basic drawings that led us to Santa Claus, the sense we have of him today, but also all these political caricatures that brought down the Boss Tweed and the Tammany Hall scandal, because caricatures were, almost like Google Google or Facebook or Snapshot or all these things today where we convey, Twitter, people got their cutting edge, clear, and sometimes sardonic, sarcastic, bitter, controversial edge on the culture through political cartoons and caricatures very strongly in the second half of the 19th century and early 20th, and until fairly recently. So you see that I put up one, The Jones Family Goes to Paris. It was a series, and it shows the Jones family looking as if they just came off the prairie, But then that series was continued by, I believe it was Frost was the caricaturist, and it was, I think, in Atlantic Monthly, or it could have been in Harper's. I'd have to look back at my notes. But and when they come back, they're wearing French fashion and feathers in their hair for the ladies and top hat, and they've been Europeanized. So the sense of the Americans coming over was popularly that we were all just, dumb bunnies off the farm, and some of that still continued in our modern life. But our Americans got kind of cultured pretty quickly. But the reality was we were sending a lot of talent to Europe to study in Munich, in Paris, in Rome, in London. And they were absorbing European tradition, creating works that were sometimes selling in European galleries, and coming back with the skills to rival European artists.
Very nice. Well, if I can refer to another movie, The Monument Men, there's a strong scene where an American and a German, they're face to face. The war is actually ending, but this officer or this soldier was sort of stranded. They were face to face, and they're faced with, well, what do I do now? And they sort of eased up, and they couldn't speak the language. So the German soldier says, "John Wayne." And the American soldier says, "Yes, John Wayne." And it was John Wayne was what they associated, and it just seems like, I know you covered this in previous sessions, but the American West has endured in the way that Europe and even as far as Vietnam. I met a man in Hollywood who immigrated from Vietnam. He's escaped and came to America, and all he wanted to do was be a Western movie star. And so he goes by Johnny, and he's awesome. He plays and sings country music from Roy Rogers' era. So it seems like the Western part of America has an identity to it that Europeans, but also Asian, all across the world, they still sort of identify us with.
Yeah, you put up a lot of points. When you see people walking around London wearing spurs on their boots, something's going on, That Western thing, a lot of it had to do with the movies and the beginning. And film, which we're going to get into very soon in our classes. We're in week 3 of the academic material, week 1 basically of the Google Hangout. But film is going to be the thing that paves over the ocean and brings our culture to Europe. But their love of the American West is not unprecedented. And I mean, it's really, people are curious about it. They're reading Hiawatha. They're interested in our Indian legends and songs. There's a curiosity. It's a strong interest. But if you back up in European culture, you could argue, this is just my take on it for the moment, okay? But if you back up and you think of the northern parts of Europe, like you think of Germany and you think of Scandinavia, they had throughout the centuries a love of Italy and Spain and the southern warm areas, and so much of of German and even in Scandinavian art, and Mendelssohn, for example, they're all yearning for Italy. The poetry of Goethe, yearning for Italy, for the orange groves, for the you just squeeze that stuff out of the yearning for it to be warm, for one thing. Well, that really drove a lot of European art and interest in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. First part. When we get into the 20th century, I'm sure people still vacation and love Italy, and a lot of our German friends are constantly planning to get to the Mediterranean. It's a big, big, big cultural thing, to Greece. But in terms of mass pop culture, Europeans and Brits and, as you say, all around the world, everybody gets crazy about American movies, the cowboy movies. So I sometimes see that as the 20th century version of this longing for, except now it's not just about warmth and orange trees and palm trees. It's about the rugged mountains of the Rockies. It's about those incredible cattle drives. It's about them, because that's grandeur. You know, a cattle drive is pretty drastic grandeur if you really want to look at it. So I don't know. In my mind, that just kind of flows in, and it's the medium of film that will really land that on the European continent.
Well, is it true? Like you said, there's so much to paint and to draw here in America. It's so beautiful. But is it true that if you are a real artist or artiste, you wanted to go to Europe to study? So what I'm really talking about is pop culture, I guess. And you're really, truly an artist. You set your sights on Europe. Is that correct? That
was true up until very, very recent. By very recently, remember, I speak in terms of half centuries when I say very recently, okay? Let's be clear about that. Very recently, to me, is 1930, all right? That was true because we didn't have training vehicles. That goes back to our theme. We didn't have the Chicago Institute of Arts. We had conservatories. So we bring this up in one of our classes early on in the semester. You know, Peabody, New England Conservatory, going back to the 1850s, basically 57, 63, et cetera, right around there. But most people, if you want to get training in and dance, that's not going to really be possible to be trained as a ballerina if you're living out in a prairie community. So you may not even have heard of it. So to get that skilled training, you really had no choice for a long time but to go to Europe. But that changes in the 19th century on the East Coast with the establishment of the orchestras, with the art, the museums, the galleries, the beginning of the training that really builds up our East Coast culture. And you better believe it's European in style. It's German music, it's a German repertoire, it's the Italian Renaissance and Baroque art. In our architecture, we talk a lot about the influence of that, the Neo-Renaissance, the Neo-Gothic. In our American architects, we talked about the Richardsonian Romanesque. And if you haven't, those of you who haven't seen this class yet, you'll get all that. Don't worry, it's really cool. Oh boy, it's crazy cool stuff the way it comes out, and you'll like the pictures, I think. But you know, that was true until you get to a point in America, and it's not until you really get to 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, where it shifts. And what's happening now? We're drawing a lot of talent to this country to train. You look at any school of music, who's coming? Who's sitting in the violin section? Who's filling up the classrooms? And you see an international component of people coming to be trained in American artistic institutions. And I just think that's one of the most exciting things that could ever have happened.
Wow. Well, you have a lot of videos on the session, and you kind of skip around through the videos, and I don't know how to not skip around because I'm interested in the fourth video that you posted on the lesson, which is native-born American religious music.
Yes. You
were there, right? Did you make this video?
Oh, everything you see this live footage we've done. That's our work, yeah. I guess I'm trying to think which thing you're exactly, but pretty much if you're seeing it, either you were using things that are, you know, copyright available, et cetera. But all these films that we've done in the interviewing and, you know, by and large, depending on the assignment, we're sending people, of course, to some pre-existing materials, absolutely. So that's what makes the course fun, because we've got the things that we filmed, the things that many, many people have created that are available on the internet, but depending on what you're referring to. So I don't know how to answer you were there. Okay.
Okay. Well,
if it was 1820, I wasn't there. Okay.
No. Oh, okay. Now we can zone in on your time period here. Okay, I got you there. But you videotaped the actual ceremonies and the music and the dance, and it's very colorful.
Yes.
It's just, I don't know. There's my recommendation. Don't miss that one.
Oh, good. Yeah, and you love all that. And, you know, I have to, for those of you who are watching who don't know the relationship we've had over the years with Paul Bass, we dragged him across Europe with us one time. Am I right about that, Paul?
Yes. One of my favorite.
Camera help as a cameraman and an advisor.
Yes.
And, you know, the only problem with traveling with the Professor Carol crowd is you don't get to sleep, do you?
Oh, those 2.5 weeks were my favorite year of my life.
Oh, you were wonderful. We had fun.
Yeah.
And of course, what we want to do is have everybody kind of have a sense of the color. The whole point of the arts is it's the deepest part of our human expression. And America had to grow up, and we're tracking that through these first units in the second semester. We had to grow up enough to have the talent base, the training institutions. We had to get comfortable enough with our own skins and get where we both had the craft to paint the l'Arc de Triomphe or the Arc of Titus in Paris or the Colosseum in Rome, which all our painters needed to go learn and do. In fact, they brought that skill back and sold a lot of those paintings and filled American living rooms with basically Italian and French and British architectural monuments that people were buying from American artists who went there and learned and saw, and made their living by sitting in a little gallery somewhere in Baltimore and selling that stuff to the middle class that wanted to have a handle on that culture by owning a painting that showed Europe, for example. But ultimately, we are going to be able to balance between imitating and refashioning the European tradition and painting our own Columbia River Gorge, if you will, or we'll be able to have confidence to do either, so that we can have a Georgia O'Keeffe, for example, right? Ultimately, when we get in the 20th century. So we can have someone who decides just to paint, the part of the West that she found irresistible, or someone else who will paint and choose just to do portraits in the European style and be successful. We just had to get comfortable in our own skin in all of the arts, and that's not easy.
Well, and it probably was very important to, as far as legacy, to study the European art, as we were still relatively new country, 100 years old. You can't just go off and make your own stuff when it came from Europe, right? I mean,
yeah.
Largely.
Well, I mean, not until, well, of course, people they want to skip the training, and that's certainly an issue in our modern culture. I think all of us would agree that. And yes, there's always a case of somebody who just shows up and doesn't seem to need any training and just, but we are in love with the self-taught concept in our culture, I think, today, and I think to our detriment, because we don't respect that training period. I was just reading some things for, on screen, actually. I think some of it actually ended up, but on our most recent material in the sacred music course that we have right now also. We always have it, but right now in real time it's simultaneous. And talking, it was Plato talking about the 3 years of training in learning to master your poetic recitation skills to be able to drill for the competitions that were held in Roman times or Greek times or antiquity, whichever. That was a very common thing that people, in that case, in the Greek. My point being that there was a great deal of attention given to training, and we certainly do that in athletics. Those people that are in the Olympics right now, which is very timely in our thinking, do you think they just woke up and went down that ski slope? I don't think so. Think of the tens of thousands of hours, I guess. And yet sometimes we think, oh, well, I don't need the training in music. My kid's a genius, or I don't want to get too far off on that. I've already gotten too far. But we have lost the traditional institutionalized understanding of the years of training it takes to gain the skills of an art form, be it dance, the ballerinas, modern dance, painting, sculpture, violin, oboe, percussion, any art, theater. It takes years and years of training. And young genius can flare out and can break into new barriers, but that's the special person. It is not how the general movement needs to move forward, seems to me.
Well, you mentioned some obstacles. You mentioned, the person who living out on the prairie didn't have the availability of the training that somebody did in Europe. Are there any other obstacles in the 19th century for training for musicians?
Well, the big obstacle, of course, is time, place, and money, as it always is for us now. Those, guess what? All of us, all the moms who are, in the van going to all the lessons, everybody knows this well. Of course, it looked very different in But the biggest obstacle that we still fight with today, I think, too, was where did the arts fit, the creative arts fit in our new American industrial practical culture? And a lot of artists are coming up against something that we still have as a problem. If it's not functional, if I can't get a job with it, if I can't pay off my student loans with it, what is the point then? Why do it? And you see, that's something we have not lost. In fact, I'd say right now it's far different, because when I was a kid, which was way before you, Paul, but even if you were just going to be the worst trumpet player in the world and never learn to draw, and you were just pathetic trying to do folk dancing or ballroom dancing, everybody had to learn some of it. And it was considered part of the character and your development. Where did that come from? Ancient Greeks, if you will. It's part of our Western cultural heritage. To be literate in the arts on some level means you're an educated person. That means that you can think better, and then you can go do your mathematics or your science or your engineering or whatever you're going to do better, because you have both sides of your brain more developed. It's real basic. People understood that. I didn't know that in the 50s. Sometimes we had to do things that were just utterly embarrassing, but we all were told we needed to learn something about it. That is not the view we have for children today, culturally and mass culture, about the arts, I think. Unless you're in a very special group, special school, socioeconomical level where everybody's on board with it, and that is not the case for most people.
Right. Well, and you are helping with that, and thank you. I mean that. But I was curious about the availability of actual instruments during the 19th century. Right now I can get on Amazon and buy cheap stuff that's probably not all that good, but at least I can get it. Mm-hmm. What about the availability of instruments?
Oh, I wish I had a wonderful statistic for you. If I could say, well, in 1883 in St. Louis, but in some ways they were much more available, because people kept themselves amused and edified and comforted by music making. Now, you couldn't get on Amazon and buy an English horn that you might want, which most people wouldn't have even had exposure to that, certainly if you're in the prairies, maybe if they've been around an orchestra. But orchestras were rare. But the domestic instruments, the piano, I invite all of us to look at how many piano manufacturers were active in the big cities. People were churning out pianos the way we churn out lapbook computers, and it used to be desktops. You remember when desktops started showing up in places like Best Buy and I don't know, all the retail stores, at Target, you can go buy a computer. Pianos used to be manufactured by so many different makers, and virtually almost every one of those makers is defunct now and has been for 30, 40, 50 years. But you crank back a century, there are pianos everywhere. And violins, people could get instruments because there was a sense that they mattered and they were important. The only two names we tend to have, of course, there's the American manufacturer of Steinway and Baldwin, which those are names people still know, Mason and Hamilton, and Chickering. People still see that name, and if they look in their great-grandmother's parlor or in an antique store, they'll see some other names of pianos. But I'm telling you, pianos and instruments were being made, and were being made available to an awful lot of people.
And they were heirlooms too, weren't they?
Yeah. But they were played for a long time. They were an heirloom. They couldn't wait. Sorry, they couldn't wait for Grandma to go so they could see who got her piano. That's not it. Now it's like, oh, what are we gonna do with Grandma's piano? Does anybody want it? Isn't that where we are now?
Yeah.
Why you're laughing? Have you been in that position? I don't want to know.
No, I've recently had a situation where there was a piano that we need. It was in the building that we were leaving, and we couldn't find anybody to get it. Couldn't find anybody who would want it. Yeah.
They are. If you look on YouTube, there's some very distressing videos, and there's more behind the backstory of why. But where instruments are just being taken to dumps because, especially in the cities, people can't afford to get them moved up to the 23rd floor. They don't have space. They don't play anymore. Who takes drawing lessons anymore? This is where certain contingent of certain charter and magnet schools certain private schools, certainly many homeschoolers are so inspiring because those families and those school administrators and those teachers are making the arts focus points for their budgets and for their teaching energies. But by and large, it's in trouble. It's in big trouble. Now, you could say, okay, that's not mass culture anymore. Professor Carol, you're talking about really old stuff, and we're doing something totally different now, and that stuff is happening, and that is true. The question, of course, always is, where is that going? What is it got that's better than what it's leaving behind? You know, what do we lose when we leave behind several centuries, many centuries of tradition that most of us think still is quite important? What do you think?
I don't know. I just want some names, some people who came out of this era. So, as you mentioned, so I can talk intelligently at a party.
Oh. Yeah, adult students, when you become members of Circles of Scholars and do our courses in any way you want, because you don't have to do all the work, and sorry kids, that's how it goes. You know, you're
That's
doing
right.
it, enjoy it. That's it. We did that part already, didn't we?
Yeah.
You'll have new names and new things to talk about at parties or at church afterwards. You know, at the coffee hour. If nothing else, you'll have that. You know. No, but you know, it is part of that conversational mass culture. In the first lesson, we talk about the gramophone a little bit. We talk about well, the gramophone is as big a news as the internet. I mean, I know it seems those little dusty, funny, wind-up cylinder or flat disc gramophones that either were tabletop with the horns, you know, or they were consoles. Like we have a console one from 1921, which is a very modern one, you know, because they're starting in the late 80s, 1880s. 1890s. But the point is, you look at that and you go, oh, that's kind of cool. Does it work? Well, in reality, they were just like bringing in magic to a home. Now, what they also meant is that you could go boop, 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 and you could hear anything that was recorded, and that began to be a lot recorded. Or player piano rolls. Magic. We'll be talking about that in the third unit, I believe it is. Yeah, when we talk about Scott Joplin and the Rags, what's cooler than a piano roll? But the reality is that also now meant that all you had to do was push those pedals, and you could play anything. You could play Rachmaninoff and be Rachmaninoff, or you could be playing the Rags, or you could be playing the marches transcribed for piano, and you didn't have to know where middle C was anymore. You just had to know how to, you know, put the roll on, and we show you that in the assignment. Actually, we don't, but we ask someone who's made a video to show you. So the point is that all the technology brings more to us, and usually means we have to do less.
Wow. Well, speaking of technology, it's been great to talk to you today on this technology that we have here.
It's fun, isn't it?
It really is, and you know, again, I mean this, that you are not only teaching us, but you are inspiring young ones to want to learn.
Well, if I can do that at all, then I am most grateful, because I was very inspired by my teachers. That's it. You know, everybody who teaches, every teacher, every homeschool mom, every Sunday school teacher, you know, we could go down the line of all the people teaching, the people that are teaching in nursing school, everybody who's doing it, generally speaking, not everybody, but most of them, is because they were inspired by their teachers. That is what it is, and that's how we pass that legacy on. It's fun to go back and do the old things, as Ziegfeld Follies and all the things. Let's look at all the stuff we're going to be doing. Look at the history of the spirituals. Look at everything we're going to be. It just gives you more. It's like a very rich dessert bar, you know, if you like desserts, or a salad bar if you like salads, or a sushi bar if you like sushi. Suddenly you've got it all there to enjoy, and it's just exciting. But the basic thing it does is it fuels our hearts. It invigorates our souls. It inspires us to develop ourselves, you know, and the arts are so able to help that happen, and that's why we love them.
Where can we expect to go in our next session with Professor Carol?
You mean in this course?
Yes.
Or at our next manifestations? You know, who knows? Let's go to the moon, okay? Well, we're going to be moving right in and looking at more. We're going to be looking at more architecture as well. We're going to be looking at more of our painting, our literature. We're going to try to keep all the arts moving, and that's not so easy because sometimes we talk more about music and sometimes more about theater. I mean, when we get to the Follies or vaudeville. Vaudeville's coming right around the corner. Fanny Brice, Will Rogers, some of the, where our model for a modern American entertainment was set, which really was back in minstrelsy, which we did in the first semester, remember. So it's really just going to be continuing those themes, but they're going to reach more population because of the technology, the traveling vaudeville circuits, the whole Broadway phenomenon by the late 1920s, well, starting with Showboat, late 1920s, and then movies moving in through right at that time too, for sure, the talkies, and then it just sort of explodes. So we have a lot of explosions ahead of us. All right, put on your safety gear.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Well, we will see you soon, and we will look forward to having all of our people back at a Google Hangout. I know a lot of you do watch these at different times. I know our students tend to like to do them late at night when they're wide awake, and I think that's a great aspect of the technology. So we're happy to have you with us at 2 in the morning. That is just great.
Thank you, Professor Carol. Look forward to the next one.
Absolutely. See you soon.
Yeah.